101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham, and this week we're joined by Jake Neer of Automotive News. Jake, welcome back to WDET.
Yeah. Again, day 3. I'm so excited. We've got a great show coming up.
We really do. Super excited to talk with 2 individuals who are hosting events within the city of Detroit to connect with young people called Coolin with Cops. We'll have that conversation coming up a little later on.
And, of course, we are going to be talking a little bit about the automotive industry because, again, I'm, with automotive news, so we got to keep the conversations going here.
Yes.
You know, Tia, one of the things that I learn about every time I'm in a newsroom is sort of like events that are happening that you didn't know existed, but somehow are really important,
Exactly.
And one of those is actually happening right now in Traverse City. It's one of the most notable events on the automotive industry calendar right here in Michigan. And I think it's safe to say most people listening probably have no idea about what I'm referring to. The Ann Arbor-based Center for Automotive Research is holding its annual Management Briefing Seminars, or MBS, in Traverse City. It's a gathering of some of the most important automotive leaders and thinkers, as well as public officials, including Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Our next guest is in Traverse City, hosting panels and ingesting the conversations, as well as all that up north fresh air. He also happens to be my boss. Jamie Butters is the executive editor of Automotive News and host of the Daily Drive podcast. Jamie, welcome back to the Metro.
Hey, Jake, glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So, for those who aren't familiar, like I was before I started working at Automotive News, what is MBS? What should people know?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to explain it to, someone like you who has politics in their blood, I would say it's sort of the auto industry's version of the Mackinac Policy Conference. Mm-hmm. It's several days up north. You kind of get people, out of the rat race, out of their daily grind, daily rhythms. You kind of feel, what it's like up here. You kind of just feel this perspective, right? Up there, you can see the curve of the earth more.
Right.
And so it's just good to kind of get out of town, talk to a lot of people. And it kind of really sets the table for a lot of, corporate planning that's going to be happening over the next month or 3.
So this year, 2024, we're in sort of a strange time in the auto industry. I mean, we've gone through a number of years, starting with COVID and the chip shortage and, really tight supplies, things like that. And now things are sort of getting back to a more normal place. So I'm curious, what are some of the biggest points of discussion this year?
Yeah, normal is a sort of a double-edged sword, right? Mm-hmm. It's a little more predictable, it's a little more comfortable, but the abnormal times, right, during COVID and the chip shortage, those were really good times for automakers and for auto dealers. Not so good for suppliers, and let's be honest, I mean, suppliers are really represented heavily at this conference. Yeah. It's kind of a lot of the focus. And, so they really struggled through that. And now, we're seeing better production, more consistent production, higher output overall, but they're feeling really whipsawed, where automakers had some really big plans for EVs during that sort of COVID bubble, and really expected the suppliers to come along with them. The suppliers put a lot of money into tooling up for EVs, and then automakers changed their priorities, changed their projections. And one of the key phrases I keep hearing is stranded capital. And it's the investments that the suppliers have made, and it's just not clear when they're going to get to use the capacity that they put in, to take care of some of the customers, especially like Ford and GM.
So if you had to describe the mood of the suppliers up there this week, how would you say it? I think it's really important for this audience specifically because you drive up I-75 and you can just look left and right, and just see, major auto industry suppliers that really define Metro Detroit's economy. So how are they feeling right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're feeling a lot of duress, right? It's the stranded capital. It's concerns about, the volume is back, it's doing much better, but it's not like it was before the pandemic. Right? We were selling 17 million or more vehicles a year for 5 years before before COVID-19. And so, this year, maybe back to 16 million, which is a good number. That would have been a historically high number 20 years ago, but it really isn't anymore. So they're really challenged to try to serve the needs of the growing EV market, which is still growing, but it's not growing as fast as they thought. And then they, still trying to make do with the ICE vehicle supply, but that is less than it used to be. And so they're really feeling squeezed. And of course, interest rates are high. So the debt that they took on to fund these expansions are costing them more than they would have a few years ago.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Automotive News Executive Editor Jamie Butters, also the host of the Daily Drive podcast, might I add. And we're talking about the Center for Automotive Research's MBS conference in Traverse City this week, a gathering of automotive executives and analysts that has become one of the most important events on the auto industry's calendar. Jamie, for Tuesday's episode of the Daily Drive podcast, you spoke with Tom Stricker. He's Group Vice President of Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs for Toyota Motor North America. He had a lot to say about the shifting policies between Republicans and Democrats and the sort of whiplash that is causing in the industry right now. Let's listen to a bit of what he had to say.
The differences between the policies of the Democrats and the Republicans, 20 years ago were there, but they were not so far apart. But now it's really one way or the other way.
So, Jamie, expand a bit on that. What policy changes is he talking about, and what is making it tough for automakers and suppliers to plan past each election like the one that's coming up this year?
Yeah, it's I don't want to say it's all about Donald Trump, but a lot of it's about Donald Trump. It used to be, and what he's referring to, if a Republican was in office, a George Bush or somebody like that, the CAFE rules, the EPA rules would get a little tighter, but not at a terribly aggressive pace. When you have a Democratic president, Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama, they would go up at a higher rate. But they were very pragmatic, in dealing with business. They weren't trying to, put the automakers out of business or make them close plants just because their vehicles, could be used and would create pollution. But when President Trump came in, he really he wanted to get rid of all the rules, the CAFE rules. Mm-hmm. I think Mary Barra really helped talk him into just kind of leaving them flat or only increasing them a little, but he's talked about, and his supporters have talked about, really gutting, the EPA and, challenging the right to set CAFE standards. There was the effort under the Trump administration to strip California's ability to set its own standards. So that presumably would become challenged again. The automakers really struggle with having different layers of regulation, right? Having the EPA rules and the NHTSA rules on CAFE, and also having California rules and, a dozen states that follow California's rules. And, California is aiming to be all EV by 2035. And there's fewer automakers prepared to support that, really, with a full lineup. So it's a complicated layer for them, but the fact that it could go from a heavy push toward EVs, like we saw earlier in the Biden administration, there's some sense that maybe even Kamala Harris would be more dogmatic about the transition to EVs, maybe a little less, pro-union pragmatist. But on the other hand, Donald Trump could gut all the rules, which could be very profitable in the short term for the U.S. auto industry, for Detroit and the UAW, but it really risks leaving them then uncompetitive in the future, right? When China and Europe and others and the Japanese and the Koreans figure out how to make EVs that are cheaper and better than the gas cars, they could be really in trouble. So it's kind of trying to make the progress. Anyway, there's just so much at stake. It could go so far. And it used to be just small differences like, a 1% increase versus a 5% increase. And now we're talking about, big chunks of market share to EVs or no rules at all.
And also, you have in the background of that same element of the trends happening, the Supreme Court's decision related to Chevron and its ability to, allow industries to come in and go through the courts instead of agencies for how they are regulated. I'm curious, do you have thoughts on how that sort of factors into everything that you're just saying right now?
Yeah, it's yet to be seen, but we do know that it doesn't go retroactive. It's really about new regulations that are put into place. So it could be less disruptive than it had seemed at first, but it really is going to limit the ability of regulators to stop certain behaviors, because every time they try, they're going to be challenged, and it's going to take time because the courts do not move efficiently. It's just not necessarily, they're just very crowded courts.
Yeah. Before we get too far and before we have to go, I do want to ask you about Governor Gretchen Whitmer's speech yesterday. She was one of the big, keynotes of the conference this year, and she touted her auto industry record over the last term and a half. Tell us a little bit more about what she had to say, and maybe a little bit about what she didn't say as well.
Yeah, she talked about, the state's resilience and the efforts to develop the workforce and kind of the usual sort of stump speech. This is what I've done, for the auto industry in my time as governor. And it was good. And, she's published a book that was a bestseller, sold very well. And so she's, told some stories from the book or about the book. And that was neat. But it was a little bit funny because right before she went on the stage, where everybody's phones were blowing up about Tim Walz being selected as the vice presidential nominee. And so we're all waiting for the question. And but I think at that time, the Harris campaign hadn't officially said it, right? Mm-hmm. People were finding out. It was all people familiar reporting. As she walked off the stage, I asked her, I'm like, didn't you want to say something about Governor Walz? She's like, nope. So I think it was just a little too soon for that, but very interesting time. Of course, she's a co-chair of the campaign committee.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it would have been relevant. We would have loved. It would have been great to hear from her then and there, but there's a protocol that must be followed.
That is true. That is very true. Before we go, Jamie, our colleague Hannah Lutz was on the show yesterday talking about EVs and the affordability of those vehicles. But I want to sort of ask you at this point, sort of for listeners who aren't following the twists and turns of the market at this point, what are your thoughts about the affordability of new cars, generally speaking, coming out of this summer? Do you see that affordability is something that might get a little bit easier for folks? Obviously, interest rates are still high, but when it comes to that sticker price, where are we at right now, and what should consumers keep in mind if they're looking for a new car soon?
Yeah, prices are high, and they may come down a little on average, but it's really something that's going to take a long time to play out. And because, it's right, the old saw, it's supply and demand, right? But the supply for competing used vehicles, we already know that's going to be low because production was hampered for a couple of years. About 3 years ago, which would be when those vehicles would be becoming available again. So there's not as many of the nice used cars to sort of compete on price against the lower end of the new car market. New cars depends whose numbers you're looking at, but $38,000 to $45,000 on average. Those used to be well into the luxury luxury space. And a lot of them are pickups, full-size SUVs, that have a lot of capability and engineering in them. Of course, a lot of cars have really cool technology in them, and that's not cheap. So, all the vehicles are expensive, but fundamentally, it still costs about $10,000 more to make an EV because the battery costs so much more than a regular engine.
Yep.
And then it's just how much can you make up over the course of driving and maintenance and all that.
Well, we'll keep an eye on those, and of course, we'll keep reporting for them here on WDET and at Automotive News as well. Jamie Butters is the executive editor of Automotive News and host of the Daily Drive podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Have to get one shameless plug in there, right, Tia? And you can find all of the coverage from MBS in Traverse City at autonews.com. Jamie, thanks so much for joining us on the Metro.
Glad to do it.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Today, expect sunny skies, a high of 79 degrees, windy day with a 20-mile-an-hour gust. It's pretty windy out there. Thursday and Friday, there'll be sunny skies, highs in the lower 80s, and there's a sunny weekend ahead of us, highs in the upper 70s both Saturday and Sunday. So definitely looking forward to a nice weather weekend, Jake. Very looking forward to that.
I'm happy that I have my windows open today. I'm airing out the house, not having to turn on the AC.
Exactly.
A nice little break.
A nice break from the oppressive heat. But coming up, Macomb County is a battleground county in the politically purple state of Michigan, and that makes it a really important place come November. We'll hear a conversation with a Democratic organizer in Macomb about what she's doing to turn out the vote for Kamala Harris. You all stay right there for the Metro. Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with Jake Neer of Automotive News. And, Jake, we just talked a little bit about the weather before the break. Super excited once again to get out there in the summer, get out there this summer before it ends. And get into the park system. We're going to have a conversation about Coolin with Cops is going to be taking its trip around the city of Detroit in parks and different spaces, talking to the young people, trying to connect again with the young people and cops. So that's an interesting conversation coming up.
Very interesting. I'm really excited to hear what the folks who are going to be talking to us have to say about it. And, it's just really nice to hear about some of the things that you can get in before the end of the summer, before school starts and all that kind of thing. And, you got your options in front of you.
We really, really, really do. And, just thinking about the options we have in front of us, we do have an election coming up in November. Options are in front of us.
I've heard that that's happening.
I didn't know, but, sometimes we figure things out on the Metro. But a lot has happened in our politics over the last few weeks. Former President Donald Trump was almost assassinated. President Biden dropped out of the race and tapped Kamala Harris to run in his stead. And yesterday, Harris chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. Michigan is a purple state that Harris and Trump both likely need to win. And within the state, Macomb County is a battleground space that often plays a big role in determining America's president. That's because it's rarely consistent. In 2008 and 2012, the county went for Barack Obama. In 2016 and 2020, it went for Donald Trump. Why is Macomb County a battleground space? And how are Democrats in the area reacting to all the political news? Producer Sam Corey sat down with Macomb County Democratic Committee Chair Alyssa Diebold to discuss this and so much more. Take it away.
Does President Biden dropping out of the race give Macomb Democrats a better chance of getting more folks out to vote and to vote for Harris?
I think, yes. President Biden has had such an amazing career, but it was not the energy that is needed right now. And I really think, Vice President Harris has met this moment flawlessly. And there is just so much more excitement. I've gotten dozens and dozens of phone calls from people who aren't even necessarily directly, Macomb Dems, but they want to be now active volunteers, and like dozens of phone calls for yard signs and all that. And I know now that Governor Walz has been chosen as the VP, Veep Stakes is over. We'll be getting those yard signs in soon, and I know folks will be happy for them.
I guess I'm curious, Alyssa, why you think people in Macomb really appreciate Donald Trump. What is happening in Macomb that sort of gets them fired up in favor of someone who is, very hardline on immigration? He has some populist rhetoric, but oftentimes is really just cynical and chaotic. That's kind of his aesthetic. Why do you think that Macomb residents like him after, having voted for Obama twice, who has a very different style?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things of why Donald Trump's rhetoric has resonated with a large percentage of Macomb County voters, and kind of across the country too, is like a level of fed upness of being like a lower middle class person maybe who is not being able to get ahead, and they're sick of being in that position. And oftentimes, the blame gets laid at the top, and it was a real visceral reaction after 8 years of President Obama. I think the fed upness is a real reason, but also it's important to note that Macomb County is the most populated county in the entire country that does not have a public university or a university. We have a great community college that is a great starting point for a lot of people, but you cannot fully obtain a 4-year degree in Macomb County. We have the University Center at Macomb Community College, but you do have to end up leaving the county in order to get that degree.
If you're just listening, I'm speaking with Alyssa Diebold. She's the Macomb County Democratic Committee Chair. We're talking about what Macomb Democrats need to do to turn out the vote for Kamala Harris as she runs for president. Macomb is, of course, a battleground county. What are the important issues to Macomb voters?
I think definitely the roads that we drive on is a big deal, but also with Lake St. Clair being right here, the protecting of that lake and that kind of natural resource is really a super bipartisan issue. And I think ultimately, jobs in the economy, that, we've been talking about this for decades and decades, but, people want to be able to have a normal job where they work, 35 to 40 hours a week, that they're able to provide a wonderful life for whatever their family looks like. Macomb is unique, and we know we're the bellwether of the country and all that. We're famous. But I think the things that are important to us are important to everyone, too.
Yeah, I do. I want to touch on that a little bit more, the bellwether aspect, because I do think this is important. The county voted for Obama twice, also voted for Trump in both 2016 and 2020. Often the way Macomb goes, so goes the country. That's kind of the line. I'm curious why you think that's been the case.
What's really interesting, I think, you gave the top lines of our presidential years. So, 16 and 20, Donald Trump won Macomb County handedly, honestly. In 2016, he won by 11.5%, and in 2020, he won by 8.1%. So that's a 3.4% drop. I'm a data nerd, so I'm into this. But in 2018 and 2020, or 2022 rather, Governor Whitmer won, in 2018 by 3.5%, and in 2022 by 5.2%. So that was a 1.7% jump. So, we as the county, and this goes with state rep races. If you look at the U.S. Senate races over the past, over a decade, we trend Democratic in gubernatorial years, and we trend Republican in presidential years. That's just what the numbers are showing us, across the board. So I think, we're a deeply purple county. We've had Democratic countywide representatives. We've had Republican countywide representatives. And I think what it really is a tone has been set in Macomb County decades and decades ago that you vote for a person, you don't necessarily vote for a party. And that relationship building really, really matters. And so what is expected of candidates here in Macomb County, it might be a little bit different than elsewhere in the state of Michigan and elsewhere in the country. But, we really expect, I think, our candidates to get out there and meet us, go door knocking, all of that, campaign basics, and really work on building that relationship, because we have a lot of cross-ticket voters that vote for one or two Democrats and a whole bunch of Republicans, and the opposite is true too.
That was our amazing producer, Sam Corey, speaking with Macomb County Democratic Committee Chair Alyssa Diebold. The Metro has reached out to the Macomb County GOP chair to get his perspective. We are still waiting to hear back on their availability.
Speaking of the presidential election and all the campaign going on, specifically in Macomb County, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance will speak to supporters in Shelby Township today. And probably the biggest event in the campaign here in Metro Detroit, Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, campaign at Metro Airport tonight at 7 at one of the hangars, which is a really interesting setting for something like this.
Interesting.
They're going to join a rally with members of the United Auto Workers, who we heard from yesterday here on the Metro.
Indeed we did, from LaShawn English, I believe it was. And this, once again, we're talking a little bit about that location choice. So hopefully when we're listening to her speech this evening, we'll understand a little bit more why she decided to go to the airport hangar.
It'll be interesting to see how loud the background noise is.
Yeah. A lot of planes going off. Maybe they're just going to ground some planes for a little while.
Maybe. I don't know.
We won't know. But I don't know. We have police officers here, so maybe we can ask them. They might know. They might have the scoop. Coming up, Detroit is trying to build better connections between its police force and its young people. We'll hear about a new initiative that's trying to do just that, and it's happening tonight at Rouge Park. You all stay right there. Metro. I am Tia Graham here with Jake Neer of Automotive News. We're grooving into the next segment.
Always.
That was a great sound. That was a great music bed. Thank you to Nate Bender, who is our engineer over there in the booth. Thank you for that one. Nice. But yeah, we're thinking about chilling with cops. We're talking about things that are happening within the city of Detroit, trying to connect with young people once again. And like we talked about, Jake, you have young people in your life. And
Absolutely.
I just think about, just the idea of being safe and understood and when you see police coming around you. So this is a pretty important conversation.
Very important conversations in all contexts for all parents and for all kids.
Exactly. And for most people, especially young people, chilling with cops, unless it's probably not at the top of mind, is one of the things that you probably won't think about. But Detroit police want to change that dynamic with the city's youth. The Detroit Police Athletic League, in partnership with the Detroit Police Department, are starting a new community initiative, Cooling with Cops, starting with a meetup at Rouge Park tonight at 6 p.m. And the meetups will occur for the next 9 weeks, every Tuesday, weather pending, of course. And this kind of initiative brings up a big question. What does it look like for police to build positive connections with young people? To tell us a little bit more about Cooling with Cops, we have with us David Greenwood here. He's the Director of Community Engagement and Facilities for Detroit POW. David, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Tia. Thanks for having us.
Of course. And as well, we have Sergeant Bryant George. He is a Detroit Police Sergeant and Detroit POW's Youth Development Officer. Sergeant George, welcome to the Metro.
Tia, thanks for having me, Mel.
Yay! So excited. So David, starting with you, what is POW for those who aren't familiar with the league?
So Detroit Police Athletic League is a 55-year-old nonprofit that was started in 1969 as a result of the 67 civil unrest. And it was a way back then for officers to bridge the gap between the police department and the community. And so in 55 years of service, we continue to do that. I was a PAL kid in the 1970s and 80s, and my dad was one of my first coaches. And I can see firsthand how, as an employee of PAL, I get a chance to see firsthand how critical these relationships are between our officers that are policing the community, but they're actually a part of the community as well. So this is Cooling with Cops is a definite way to continue to do that.
and you have that personal experience and connection being a part of the league, having your dad be a coach of the league as well. I personally was a part of it as well. I was on the dance and cheer team for the West Side Cubs.
What?
So yeah.
I was a West Side Bronco.
Oh, see, I love so just having that in the city of Detroit, knowing that you had that access point or that outlet there. What is it like working with kids, especially under that Detroit PAL umbrella? And what have you seen working with kids over the past decade or so?
Well, what we see is growth. What we see is friendships. I think one of the biggest things, even for myself, I maintain a friendship 40 some odd years later with friends that I met through Detroit PAL. And it's cool to play sports and all of those good things, but we know through sports we develop so much more. There's goal setting, resilience, embracing a healthy lifestyle, accountability, and teamwork that's all kind of intertwined in all of that. And so with that, essentially, if you look at what I just said, that gives us our GREAT model. That's the acronym for GREAT: goal setting, resilience, embracing a healthy lifestyle, accountability, and teamwork. And those are things that are generic and just kind of organically developed through Detroit PAL.
I love that. I love that. And David, we're going to stick with you really quickly before we jump on over to Sergeant George. Have you seen a decline in students participating or playing, or have you seen anything like that shift as we continue to go forward throughout, the generations?
Well, I mean, prior to the pandemic, we were serving about 15,000 youth. And when the pandemic hit, obviously, we couldn't, do the things that we wanted to do in person. So we had to shift to a virtual program. And then we dropped down about 2,000 some odd kids participating. And we're slowly each year growing back up. So last year we served about 7,500. And this year we anticipate serving about 9,000. But we're on a 10-15% growth rate. Hopefully we'll get to about serving 20,000 kids in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and speaking of the pandemic, we talked a little bit earlier as well. This COVID-19, it did so much to so many different industries and aspects of our life throughout, just in general. And hearing the kids slowly trickling back in, what are some of the other things that you're seeing that were causes of them not participating other than the pandemic, where we're seeing maybe barriers due to transportation, where we're seeing barriers, money maybe,
Yeah, absolutely. Detroit PAL has always historically been the program that we pride ourselves on being affordable. So where a lot of parents, if they have multiple kids, it becomes quite cost prohibitive for them to get all their kids involved. And so PAL is one of the answers for that. We do a lot of our fundraising with that in mind, fundraising to keep costs low. And so that's probably our biggest challenge. Transportation can be a difficult thing to combat, but Detroit PAL is really, interspersed throughout the entire community. So we're just about in every corner of the city of Detroit and beyond.
Which is great. So, Sergeant George, we're going to bring you in. What are you seeing in terms of community engagement, especially as you're working with young people on a daily, regular basis? What are you seeing with them right now?
So through my lenses, I see a positive outlook. I mean, number one, our chief, James E. White, he's a great leader. He illustrates that our community is everything, and we work for the community, not ourselves. And so when you get up every day and you come to work for the community, and kids just so happen to be in the community, and they are the most important people, in our community, because they are right now and they are our future. As a law enforcement officer in a community relations role, it's a positive outlook. So making sure they have a positive relationship. They don't have to be afraid if they have questions or if they're going through things, that they know our Detroit PAL police officers are here, and just as well as any other police officer in the city of Detroit is there for them.
And when we talk about that feeling, that negative or positive, whatever the feeling may be, what are some of the things or tactics that you guys use other than just talking to them to really get them to understand that this is we're good?
Yeah, I try to make it personal for them.
Yeah.
I was a former Detroit PAL kid,
All through
2002. As part of the basketball team, won a championship. I met a Detroit police officer who's actually still on the job, Lieutenant Robert Johnson. And that's the reason why I became a police officer. And so he just always made it personable, you know, so they can know me as Sergeant George, or they can know me by my nickname, BG. I used to have 2-strand twists, so a lot of the boys have the twist. And, which product are you using? And, things of that nature. And so, it's just all about just being yourself. I wear a uniform to come to work, but I'm still a person. And, when you allow them to, know that, and they can feel and touch and see, and, you really can just, break that barrier of, I'm afraid of the police, or I can't trust the police.
And for myself, growing up in the city of Detroit, I grew up on Joint Southfield in that particular area. Yeah, so we did have community policing, or per se, we had officers who were around. You would see them maybe at the corner store. You would see them around and have interactions with them on a regular basis. And there were some of the things that I didn't often, I guess I can see it kind of lessened as I got a little bit older. So what are some of the things that you all are doing to remind people that you all are still there on the streets, and you all still there to talk to in a communal way?
I mean, you have neighborhood police officers at every single precinct, and they do an amazing job of being there for quality of life issues. And, that's the proactive side of policing, where they get out and they're at different events and they create programs. Detroit PAL, I mean, we complement each other. The police department can't do this by itself. You need Detroit PAL. When you look at 1 out of 5 kids in Michigan, they don't have access to after-school programming. So you have something like Detroit PAL that are keeping kids engaged after school. Our goal is to keep them away from guns, away from gang violence. Hey, pick up that football, keep this in your hand, go to a good high school, go to a good college, become whatever it is that you want to become, even become a Detroit police officer,
Exactly.
Like I did. But, that's our goal, is that, we're present. And you don't have to be perfect, but you just have to be present.
Right now, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with David Greenwood, the Director of Community Engagement and Facilities for Detroit PAL, and Sergeant Bryant George with Detroit Police and Detroit Police Athletic League's Youth Development Officer. We're talking about the Cooling with Cops initiative that's happening tonight at Rouge Park, as you just heard. Grew up in that particular area, so I'm very familiar with that community. Is there any example where that's happened, prevented violence before it occurred because of the presence of police? So we're going to stick with you, Sergeant Brown, but that's one of my questions. Is you're in these communities and you're looking at preventative ways to reach the kids and reach the people in the community. Have you ever stopped something happening?
We have a summer program going on right now through the Detroit Police Department and Grow Detroit Young Talent. One kid during the restorative circle mentioned that, hey, I listen to a certain type of music, and sometimes I just want to crash out.
Yes.
And so when he mentioned crash out, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, I want to hurt somebody. And so we were like, hey, let's try meditating. Let's try listening to different music. Let's think about some of our choices, because we can choose our choices, but we can't choose our consequences. And so I think that was one preventative measure, where you're allowing kids to express what they're doing, and you're giving them solutions. And so when you look at an initiative like this, we know that there's a problem in our society throughout this country with gun violence. And unfortunately, a lot of young people are becoming victims of gun violence. But as leaders and as police officers, as civilians at Detroit PAL, how do we come together and how do we bring a solution? And I think Coolin with Cops, where kids are having this commitment to sports, all of these coaches that are volunteers, all of these parents that are, I want a better life for my child. And now they don't have to be afraid of the police, because we're bringing water, we're bringing, services. And so tonight, to see JP Morgan Chase, purchase water and snacks for our Detroit PAL kids, to see the City of Detroit Health Department bring out resources where if they want to learn about the negative impacts of vaping or using marijuana, we're bringing all of that out tonight. Ceasefire, they're going to provide a positive message of, stay away from guns, stay away from violence. So,
but for both of you, it's Jake Neer here with Automotive News. But I'm curious if you've had tough conversations with the kids that you work with about law enforcement, and if so, how has that gone? Like, could you give us examples of how maybe this has opened up conversations in an era where some kids are, not sure about how to feel about policing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we both can speak to that. During the pandemic, when I mentioned we couldn't meet in person, we developed a program called Critical Conversations. And the Critical Conversations was our attempt to engage Detroit youth in tough conversations about police officers. And what we did was the Detroit police officers took a role as anonymous adults in the conversation initially, and the kids were able to express their concerns about police officers, their actual, disdain toward police officers, and just their heartfelt feelings toward police officers. After a couple of meetings, we were able to disclose the fact that the adults in the room were police officers, and you could see a lot of the kids' mouths drop, and the shock and amazement that they had. They poured their hearts out, but they were able to gain perspective, and the officers in that conversation were able to gain perspective. As here's what the community really thinks about me as an officer, and how do I change that? And then so it was positive in that way, and then. We went from about a 38% approval rating for the kids in a pre-survey to over 70% by the time that 8-week program had concluded. And so our kids were able to gain a lot more respect and understanding for police officers, not just as officers, but as human beings.
And Sergeant George, like I said, I mean, they're hard conversations. Is it hard for you sometimes to hear that and be involved in that?
It is. I mean, when you look at our youth today, and they're born with technology all around them, and sometimes they spend more time on social media than perhaps reading a book. And so if they're seeing all these negative images, these negative videos, and these negative memes, as officers, it's our job to come up with solutions. So through the Critical Conversation program at Detroit PAL, it's that simple question of why. Why do you feel so uncomfortable around the police? Why are you so afraid? And you allow them to get that out because I saw this or my family experienced this. And one of the sessions that I teach is on how to make and maintain positive contact with the police. So when you're telling them a reasonable officer, when you interact with that type of officer, even during a traffic stop, just listen to what he or she has to say. And then think about that. And then that's how you move. But you'll see some examples where you're on a traffic stop and people just react and they don't even listen. They don't think about things. So as officers at PAL, we get to teach them those type of tools in life.
Thank you so much. Cooling with Cops is starting to meet up tonight at Rouge Park. That's at 6 p.m. And the meetups will occur every Tuesday for the next 9 weeks. So you just have to go on over to, what's the website?
www.detroitpal.org.
That's simple as that, www.detroitpal.org. You can go there and find that full list. David Greenwood is the Director of Community Engagement and Facilities for Detroit PAL. Thank you so much for being here on the
Thanks
Metro.
for having us.
Of course. And Sergeant Bryant George is the Detroit Police Sergeant and Detroit PAL's Youth Development Officer. Thank you for being here, Sergeant George.
My pleasure, ma'am, for the community.
Primary elections were yesterday in Michigan, and we already have the vote totals. We'll discuss the results next with WDET's own Pat Batchelor.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham here with Jake Neer of Automotive News, and we have a legend in here with us.
We absolutely do.
Where?
Sitting right here at this table across from me, Pat Batchelor.
I'm so excited to have Pat on the bench. I'm sorry. So go ahead. We have this really cool conversation coming up, and we're going to learn about what's going on with the primary elections, what happened yesterday in Michigan. And, I'm really, really interested to know what happened with the proposal for the library in Detroit. So definitely interested in this conversation.
Yeah, that's right. So, again, if you haven't heard, the primary elections happened yesterday here in Michigan. It's often a time when only high-informed voters, those who work in politics or are closest to the action or just political junkies, cast a vote to determine who will move on to the general election in November. That's because nationally, only about 20% of registered voters participate in the primaries. Despite it being an interesting presidential year, there weren't a lot of surprises on Tuesday. What else can we learn about what happened in the primary? As we said, we have Pat Batchelor right here. He's WDET's host of Morning Edition. Pat, welcome back to the Metro.
Thank you very much.
So, A lot to unpack here. But let's get into some of the bigger races. Congressional Democrat Alyssa Slotkin won her primary as well against Mike Rogers on the Republican side. Slotkin defeated Hill Harper, an actor for the spot. Did Harper win any areas other than here in Detroit?
Well, that's hard to say without looking at how other individual communities voted. Some cities have not posted their results online yet, but I can tell you that Slotkin won every county by wide margins, as did Mike Rogers.
You know, it's interesting, Pat. I was just in the UP of all places, and of course, yard signs don't vote.
Right.
But the only statewide or big signs that I saw for any candidate were all for Alyssa Slotkin, and it sort of took me back. It's like, well, there's some statewide appeal there. Of course, we also had the Michigan 13th Congressional District race where Sri Tanadar defeated Mary Waters. Can you explain how big the 13th District is first for the people who might not know?
Well, the 13th District covers the east side of Detroit, as well as Highland Park, Hamtramck, Harper Woods, the Grosse Pointes within Wayne County, and several downriver communities. Tanadar won 54% of the vote, 20 points better than Detroit City Councilwoman Mary Waters, who won 34%, and then a third candidate, Shakira Lynn Hawkins, won a little more than 11%.
And talk about sort of the importance of this race because Sri Tanadar obviously won last time in a really crowded primary field. This time it was much narrower. Of course, he was the incumbent, but this was a big one for, I think, the city of Detroit and how it views its representation in Congress.
Indeed. And one of the things that his opponents had said was that he was not responsive to constituents, especially in Detroit. And this is a point that Mary Waters raised last night.
I have never, ever seen so many people who were unhappy with representation. Nobody, not one person, said to me, not then or now, that they were satisfied with the representation that they were receiving.
Now, for his part, Tanadar says his office has resolved hundreds of constituent matters since he took office, and he takes pride in that.
And people don't care whether their problem is a federal problem or a state problem or a local problem. They want it to be solved. And my team is very focused on it.
For what it's worth, Tanadar won about 45% of the vote in Detroit, so residents there did prefer the two black candidates, but he performed much better in the suburbs.
I did want to get to the proposals. One of the proposals that we want to discuss is Proposal L. That's Detroit's public library millage renewal, which passed by a wide margin. What was that proposal, and what did it mean for Detroiters?
Well, it's the operating millage renewal. Every so often, cities will renew their millages. This is how much money you pay, how many dollars you pay per $1,000 of property value to operate the library. Most of the time, millage renewals pass fairly easily. This one provides the library with nearly all of its operating budget over the next decade. Homeowners in the city will pay about $3.99 for every $1,000 of taxable property value. One complaint that opponents brought up, and there weren't many, was that some of the money would be captured through tax increment financing, but that didn't stand in the way of Proposal L passing with about 85% of the vote.
Got about 30 seconds left with Pat. I would say that the results were fairly predictable, if I should venture out into that far out in the water. But I'm curious if there's anything that we can glean from these election results in terms of the general election in November.
Well, based on turnout, I'm not really sure. We had about 25% turnout in Oakland County compared to 37% in the 2020 primary. All of the turnout numbers for this primary reflect what was normal for a primary in a presidential year before the pandemic. Most people are voting absentee now these days, so we do have the 9 days of early voting. So we'll see where that ends up in November.
Pat Batchelor is WDET's host of All Things Considered. Pat, thanks so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
And that's the Metro for Wednesday, August 7th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is also on YouTube if you like listening that way. And it's also produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Support from Manel Scott, Sydney Walkley, and our engineer is Nate Bender. Music, Sam Bobian and Will Sessions. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Jake and I return tomorrow.